Hi, my name is Hans-Peter Meyer. I'm doing a series of interviews with elected leaders in the Comox Valley about sustainability issues. Today I'm talking to Mayor Paul Ives about the regional growth strategy and how it relates to sustainability. Hi, Paul.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good. So a year ago, the regional district adopted the sustainability strategy, and we're in the middle of March 2011, and local government's about to adopt the regional growth strategy. They're two different strategies. Can you just tell me a little bit about how the regional growth strategy helps us get to a couple of the sustainability goals that were adopted last year?
Sure. The regional growth strategy really focuses on compact urban growth, and I think that was one of the key elements around the sustainability strategy. We learned about housing forms, we learned about transportation challenges.
So housing forms means like the kind of house we live in?
Yeah, I mean, there's some targets in the sustainability strategy that talk about a certain percentage of housing being multifamily as opposed to single family. Predominantly, and particularly in Comox, our housing form is single family. And has
a lot of big single families.
Yeah, single family subdivisions, car oriented. We're looking at within the sustainability strategy is changing that housing form towards more of a balance. More multifamily. Obviously, we have.
Does that mean apartment blocks in some of these areas?
Could mean apartment blocks, townhouses. Obviously, there's patio home complexes, but it could also mean secondary suites and coach houses within the single-family environment. Mm-hmm. So that within a typical subdivision, you could have one or two secondary suites with some allowances for perhaps coach houses.
Now, you've said that in the town of Comox, you've actually you had some initial pushback on secondary suites. Basically, now it's acceptable pretty much everywhere, and that in the new developments that are coming in, it's a voluntary option, and about 1 in 10 lots are taking that up.
Yeah, for the new subdivisions that we did behind Quality Foods and in the Becton Estates areas, we went with smaller lots for starters, and we looked at providing an allowance with some design controls on what a secondary suite could look like. It had to obviously be part of the house. Initially, it could only be side by side or up and down. And we've broadened that a little bit. And that was taken up by probably 1 in 10 house builders, either for their speculative sale or for custom purposes. And I know of people that live in those houses and have rented out the suites with great success. And it provides an opportunity for more affordability. So that's worked out really well.
So that's addressing things like, so you said your built form,
yeah.
One of the built form sustainability issues. Transportation, presumably you get more density, then it's more effective transportation and more users.
Yeah.
Now you said in our earlier conversation, you said the regional growth strategy for the first time draws a line around whether or not you agree with where the line is, it does draw a line. The sustainability strategy talks about about denser forms, so those obviously fit together. Can you talk about some of the challenges of getting to make this stuff real? Like, it's nice to have policy, but how willing are people to actually do this stuff?
Well, I think as an elected official, it was a challenge getting to the point of acceptance on the regional growth strategy boundaries, deciding where those no-go lines were going to be drawn. Certainly, there's not everyone going to be happy about that. But by and large, I think we made some good compromises and settlements on those issues. Getting the success of the regional growth strategy into play will probably take us the next 5-10 years to see how it's all worked out. From the perspective of the town, we're saying, look, the areas within our municipal boundaries need to be looked at for growth first and foremost. There's been a tendency in the past number of years to simply expand or extend the boundaries. Mm-hmm. Developers acquire land on the periphery, looking at assembling that, getting enough people to go on along with them, and won't you take us in to provide the sewer and water services? I think we found over the last 5 to 10 years that hasn't always worked out for the best for the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. Infrastructure costs.
So let's talk about this a second. So the idea is that when developers bring a project to the community, that they pay. There's development cost charges and they pay for infrastructure. Doesn't that just take care of the cost of those things?
Initially it does. If they bring an area in and they provide all the sewer and water services, there shouldn't be any cost to the existing taxpayers of the town. On a long-term basis, we have to make sure that capacities are sufficient. We found with perhaps, one would argue, climate change, that storm events are more and more frequent. So whether the capacity of pipes that were put in the ground 10 years ago are sufficient going forward, who knows? So there's that big question. We did get a study that showed that if we focus our development within the town boundaries on infill and other criteria, that we could take advantage of existing infrastructure and not necessarily extend out into the rural areas. You know, at some point in time, that has to be factored in.
So if you stay, so your this is an engineering report, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at infrastructure.
Yes.
So that's one of the really big costs that local government deals with, right?
Yes.
In fact, it's a bit of an issue right now, this unfunded liability thing, right? Where things are paid for now, but there's no provision for paying for them in 25, 50 years.
Like a life cycle costing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if the town of Comox stays within its boundaries, grows within its boundaries, doesn't expand, and hence makes more, transit possible, which puts less wear and tear on the roads, less parking needs, less asphalt, drainage problems, that your engineer's study said that you won't have to replace your infrastructure is good for 40, 50 years, something like that?
Well, I think they looked out on the horizon for 20 years under our community plan.
Okay, 20 years.
So they've looked at that. I mean, speculation.
So basically, you're saying if you grow smart, if you apply the regional growth strategy, which in lots of places helps meet sustainability, in this case, it's financial sustainability.
Yes.
It's not going to cost your taxpayers a huge infrastructure bill within those 20 years.
Right. And I think, that's the big education piece that we've had to understand as elected officials, and also to talk to our public about that. That report was submitted on the infrastructure just ahead of the last set of open houses, and it was good to bring that forward, because it really closed off that loop of understanding, I think, for people to understand, okay, why is more density good? Why is it important that we keep within our boundaries? And how is it going to affect you as a taxpayer? Because really, that's where we engage taxpayers the most effectively, is talking about their pocketbook. If it's going to affect their pocketbook now or in the future, then it's going to be of interest to them.
Right, and most people, there's some kind of perception that if we actually do this sustainability stuff, it's going to cost us. Most of what I'm seeing, and your report bears that out, is that in the long term, it's actually cost effective. It's like looking after your house now rather than dealing with a falling apart roof.
And I think local governments in the past have had sort of a pay-as-you-go mentality, which isn't bad. They've had to incur debt from time to time for larger facilities or infrastructure projects, and paid off, hopefully, over time. But we've asked our staff to start really looking at life cycle costing, looking at building reserves, making sure that we have enough in the pot when we do have to replace infrastructure. Eventually we will. And I suppose across Canada, the talk has been around the so-called infrastructure deficit. So how can we tackle that with our limited resources that we have? Well, be smart.